Matthew Henry's Commentary on the Whole Bible. An exposition, with practical observations, of the Book of Psalms. Psalm 119:5. Psalm 119 verse 33 and 34. Here. 1. David prays earnestly that God himself would be his teacher. He had prophets, and wise men and priests, about him, and was himself well instructed in the law of God, yet he begs to be taught of God, as knowing that none teaches like him. Job 36 verse 22. Observe here. 1. What he desires to be taught, not the notions or language of God's statutes, but the way of them. The way of applying them to myself and governing myself by them. Teach me the way of my duty which thy statutes prescribe, and in every doubtful case let me know what thou wouldst have me to do. Let me hear the word behind me, saying, This is the way, walk in it. Isaiah 30 verse 21. 2. How he desires to be taught, in such a way as no man could teach him. Lord, give me understanding. As the God of nature, he has given us intellectual powers and faculties, but here we are taught to pray that, as the God of grace, he would give us understanding to use those powers and faculties about the great things which belong to our peace, which, through the corruption of nature, we are averse to. Give me understanding, and enlightened understanding, for it is as good to have no understanding at all as not to have it sanctified. Nor will the spirit of revelation and the word answer the end unless we have the spirit of wisdom in the heart. This is that which we are indebted to Christ for the Son of God has come, and has given us understanding. 1 John 5 verse 20. 2. He promises faithfully that he would be a good scholar. If God would teach him, he was sure he should learn to good purpose. I shall keep thy law, which I shall never do unless I be taught of God, and therefore I earnestly desire that I may be taught. If God, by his Spirit, give us a right and good understanding, we shall be 1. Constant in our obedience. I shall keep it to the end of my life, which will be the surest proof of sincerity. It will not avail the traveler to keep the way for a while, if he do not keep it to the end of his journey. 2. Cordial in our obedience. I shall observe it with my whole heart, with pleasure and delight, and with vigor and resolution. That way which the whole heart goes the whole man goes, and that should be the way of God's commandments, for the keeping of them is the whole of man. Psalm 119 verse 35 and 36. He had before prayed to God to enlighten his understanding, that he might know his duty, and not mistake concerning it. Here he prays to God to bow his will, and quicken the active powers of his soul, that he might do his duty. For it is God that works in us both to will and to do, as well as to understand, what is good. Philippians 2 verse 13. Both the good head and the good heart are from the good grace of God, and both are necessary to every good work. Observe here. 1. The grace he prays for. 1. That God would make him able to do his duty. Make me to go, strengthen me for every good work. Since we are not sufficient of ourselves, our dependence must be upon the grace of God, for from him all our sufficiency is. God puts his Spirit within us, and so causes us to walk in his statutes. Ezekiel 36 verse 27, and this is that which David here begs. 2. That God would make him willing to do it, and would, by his grace, subdue the aversion he naturally had to it. Incline my heart to thy testimonies, to those things which thy testimonies prescribe. Not only make me willing to do my duty, as that which I must do, and therefore am concerned to make the best of, but make me desirous to do my duty as that which is agreeable to the new nature, and really advantageous to me. Duty is then done with delight when the heart is inclined to it. It is God's grace that inclines us, and the more backward we find ourselves to it, the more earnest we must be for that grace. 2. The sin he prays against, and that is covetousness. Incline my heart to keep thy testimonies, and restrain and mortify the inclination there is in me to covetousness. That is a sin which stands opposed to all God's testimonies, for the love of money is such a sin as is the root of much sin, of all sin. Those therefore that would have the love of God rooted in them must get the love of the world rooted out of them, for the friendship of the world is enmity with God. See in what way God deals with men, not by compulsion, but he draws with the cords of a man, working in them an inclination to that which is good, and an aversion to that which is evil. 3. His plea to enforce this prayer, Lord, bring me to, and keep me in, the way of thy commandments, for therein do I delight, and therefore I pray thus earnestly for grace to walk in that way. Thou hast wrought in me this delight in the way of thy commandments, wilt thou not work in me an ability to walk in them, and so crown thy own work? Psalm 119 verse 37. Here, 1. David prays for restraining grace, that he might be prevented and kept back from that which would hinder him in the way of his duty. Turn away my eyes from beholding vanity. The honors, pleasures, and profits of the world are the vanities, the aspect and prospect of which draw multitudes away from the paths of religion and godliness. The eye, when fastened on these, infects the heart with the love of them, and so it is alienated from God and divine things, and therefore, as we ought to make a covenant with our eyes, and lay a charge upon them, that they shall not wander after, much less fix upon, that which is dangerous, Job 31 verse 1, so we ought to pray that God by his providence would keep vanity out of our sight, and that by his grace he would keep us from being enamored with the sight of it. 2. He prays for constraining grace, that he might not only be kept from everything that would obstruct his progress heavenward, but might have that grace which was necessary to forward him in that progress. Quicken now me in thy way, quicken me to redeem time, to improve opportunity, to press forward, and to do every duty with liveliness and fervency of spirit. Beholding vanity deadens us and slackens our pace. A traveler that stands gazing upon every object that presents itself to his view will not rid ground, but, if our eyes be kept from that which would divert us, our hearts will be kept to that which will excite us. Psalm 119 verse 38. Here is 1. The character of a good man, which is the work of God's grace in him. He is God's servant, subject to his law, and employed in his work, that is, devoted to his fear, given up to his direction and disposal, and taken up with high thoughts of him, and all those acts of devotion which have a tendency to his glory. Those are truly God's servants who, though they have their infirmities and defects, are sincerely devoted to the fear of God, and have all their affections and motions governed by that fear. They are engaged and addicted to religion. 2. The confidence that a good man has towards God, in dependence upon the word of his grace to him. Those that are God's servants may, in faith and with humble boldness, pray that God would establish his word to them, that is, that he would fulfill his promises to them in due time, and in the meantime give them an assurance that they shall be fulfilled. What God has promised we must pray for. We need not be so aspiring as to ask more, we need not be so modest as to ask less. Psalm 119 verse 39. Here, 1. David prays against reproach, as before, verse 22. David was conscious to himself that he had done that which might give occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, which would blemish his own reputation and turn to the dishonor of his family. Now he prays that God, who has all men's hearts and tongues in his hands, would be pleased to prevent this, to deliver him from all his transgressions, that he might not be the reproach of the foolish, which he feared. Psalm 39 verse 8. Or he means that reproach which his enemies unjustly loaded him with. Let their lying lips be put to silence. 2. He pleads the goodness of God's judgments. Lord, thou sittest in the throne, and thy judgments are right and good, just and kind, to those that are wronged, and therefore to thee I appeal from the unjust and unkind censures of men. It is a small thing to be judged of man's judgment, while he that judges us is the Lord. Or thus, thy word and ways, and thy holy religion, are very good, but the reproaches cast on me will fall on them. Therefore, Lord, turn them away, let not religion be wounded through my side. Psalm 119 verse 40. Here, 1. David professes the ardent affection he had to the word of God. I have longed after thy precepts, not only loved them, and delighted in what I have already attained, but I have earnestly desired to know them more and do them better, and am still pressing forward towards perfection. Tastes of the sweetness of God's precepts will but set us a longing after a more intimate acquaintance with them. He appeals to God concerning this passionate desire after his precepts. Behold, I have thus loved, thus longed. Thou knowest all things, thou knowest that I am thus affected. 2. He prays for grace to enable him to answer this profession. Thou hast wrought in me this languishing desire, put life into me, that I may prosecute it. Quicken me in thy righteousness, in thy righteous ways, according to thy righteous promise. Where God has wrought to will he will work to do, and where he has wrought to desire, he will satisfy the desire.